Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world one book at a time.
Today, we're doing a systems-level deep dive into a really towering work of speculative fiction, Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale. And our mission here, just to be clear, is not to predict a specific future, but really to dissect the anatomy of tyranny as a system.
Exactly. We're pulling back the curtain on the Republic of Gilead, and we're looking beyond, the specific story of Offred to really understand the architecture of control. How does a society that seems stable go from relative individual freedom, from having a career, a bank account,
Everything you take for granted.
to total institutional control over the most personal aspect of life?
Well, that's the core question we have to explore. How do these deeply felt societal anxieties, and in this case, it's specifically plummeting birth rates and radical shifts in gender roles, how do they become the crucial immediate scaffolding for political tyranny to take root, and then eventually exert total control?
And the relevance is immediate for you, the listener. This isn't about assigning partisan blame. We're not getting into ideological arguments about political leanings. This is a cold, analytical look at the mechanics of power.
The incentives.
The incentives placed on everyone, the oppressed and the oppressors. The hierarchy that maintains the structure, the narratives that justify these horrific acts, and of course, the unintended consequences that allow a system of subjugation to thrive. What does this book teach us about that subtle, slow creep of lost rights?
Before we really start to dissect the machine of Gilead, it's probably best to ground ourselves in the source. I mean, the architect of this world is Margaret Atwood.
Of course.
She was born in Ottawa in 1939, and she's just a hugely prolific writer. She's lived all over Canada, the U.S., Europe, and authored over 40 books. We're talking novels, short stories, poetry, literary criticism.
Her career is just remarkable, really. It's marked by this deep commitment to social observation and real literary excellence. We know she's a winner of the Booker Prize for The Blind Assassin, and The Handmaid's Tale itself was shortlisted, along with her novel, Cat's Eye.
Right, so her international acclaim really means her work is often cited as a benchmark for this kind of contemporary cautionary fiction.
Yeah.
And this novel, I mean, it immediately entered modern folklore as a vital text when it came out in 1985. Critics just recognized its power right away. It was described as a work that brilliantly illuminates some of the darker interconnections of politics and sex.
And there was that famous comparison from E.L. Dockerer, right? He called it a companion volume to Orwell's 1984.
He did. He said it's verso, in fact.
And that distinction is so key for a systems analysis. 1984 is about state control of political and historical truth. Big Brother, the telescreen, the memory hole.
All public-facing, in a way.
Exactly. Atwood's focus, its verso, is fundamentally different. It's about the state's control of the personal, the biological, the domestic sphere. It shows us that tyranny can be built not just in the Ministry of Truth, but inside the bedroom and the kitchen.
Okay, so let's unpack that core idea. The setting is the Republic of Gilead. It's a totalitarian, fundamentalist regime that's been established in what was a part of the United States. And it is explicitly a system built on religious fanaticism and the instrumentalization of female fertility.
And the central thesis of the book, if we just state it plainly, is how a system, one that's driven by a severe environmental and biological crisis, justifies the complete subjugation and instrumentalization of women.
And it does this by systematically stripping them of everything: economic independence, literacy, individual identity.
And transforming them purely into state-controlled reproductive vessels.
But what's so fascinating here is the scaffolding, how the narrative itself is presented to us. Offred's story, which is the bulk of the novel, is revealed in the historical notes at the end to be a partial transcript of the proceedings of the 12th Symposium on Gileadian Studies.
Held in the year 2195. That detail, it just changes everything.
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
This is a key detail the book forces you to reckon with.
We aren't reading a contemporary novel then. We're reading a fragmented reconstruction of events, and it's based on 30 cassette tapes found loose in a box.
Tapes that were originally labeled with things like Elvis Presley's Golden Years or Boy George Takes It Off. It was camouflaged to hide this historical record.
So that crucial detail, it frames the entire analysis. And it speaks directly to systems failure, doesn't it? The very existence of these tapes, of the symposium in 2195, it suggests the regime eventually failed.
Right, but the story we're reading is already filtered through the lens of historical analysis and guesswork. We're left with this fragmented, unreliable nature of history itself.
The fact that the story even had to be told at all taped in secret preserved is almost as important as the content. It shows that desperate need to preserve truth when the system is just dedicated to erasing it.
And that insight, that we are reading a broken, incomplete historical record, that's what prepares us to analyze the systems of control themselves.
So let's start with the foundation, the crisis that made Gilead even possible in the first place.
The terrifying thing about Gilead, really, is that it didn't just spring from nothing. It used a very real existential crisis, these plummeting global birth rates, as its foundation.
Which gives the tyranny a seemingly rational, even utilitarian purpose.
Survival of the species.
That's the ultimate justification for total control, isn't it? If the human race is failing to reproduce, then any measure, no matter how draconian, can be justified as necessary.
And the historical notes confirm this phenomenon.
Yeah.
The collapse of birth rates, particularly in Northern Caucasian societies, was observed globally. It wasn't just a local problem. And the source material, it makes it clear that the causes of this infertility were, they are absurdly wide-ranging. It really demonstrates how a desperate system just grabs onto any narrative it can to justify its actions.
So what were they citing?
For instance, the causes are systemic. Pervasive environmental toxins, whether from men-spraying trees or industrial and agricultural runoff, described really colorfully as souped-up piss flowed into the rivers.
That detail, the souped-up piss, it makes the source of the problem sound so banal, so everyday. A result of industrialized farming and unregulated pollution.
Exactly. But we also hear about these huge catastrophic failures, like exploding atomic power plants.
Specifically mentioned along the San Andreas Fault.
During earthquakes, yeah.
Yeah.
And we can't forget the biological warfare element. The book details these biologically engineered viruses that played a role.
Right, the sterility-causing virus.
Developed through secret, pre-Gilead gene splicing experiments with mumps, and it was originally intended for the Moscow caviar supply. The confluence of all these technical and environmental disasters just created a perfect storm.
So we have chemical pollution, nuclear disasters, and engineered viruses all contributing to widespread infertility. It's a systemic, multifaceted failure of the modern industrial world. But what's fascinating here is how the Gilead system handled these root causes.
We'll see, since male sterility was clearly a major component of the crisis, the Gilead regime instantly corrected the narrative. They didn't fix the toxins or the fallout. They fixed the language.
What do you mean?
Offred recalls hearing the forbidden word sterile and realizing the official law. There is no such thing as a sterile man anymore, not officially. There are only women who are fruitful and women who are barren.
That is the ultimate narrative manipulation, isn't it? It takes this complex systemic environmental and biological failure and just funnels the entire responsibility, the entire moral fault onto the reproductive capacity of one gender.
By redefining reality, the system instantly transforms biological truth into legal and moral fault. It shifts all the blame and all the pressure onto the female population to perform their function.
So once that crisis provided the moral justification, the institutional shift was immediate and terrifyingly effective. And it targeted the core of individual autonomy, economic control, and intellectual freedom.
Yes, the speed of the shift is one of the most chilling elements of the book. The narrator, she remembers the events as almost unbelievable at the time, like dreams dreamt by others that were awful without being believable.
You ignore them because they seem too melodramatic.
Exactly. Then one day she goes to work at the library and she's told women were let go from their jobs. The manager just says, "You can't work here anymore, it's the law."
And how quickly did the intellectual control, the banning of reading, follow that economic blow?
It was simultaneous, because the truly systemic lever was financial. Moira explains it so succinctly. Bank accounts were frozen. Any account with an F for female on the CompuCard instead of an M was just cut off.
For our listeners, the CompuCard was essentially their central digital ID and bank access card. So the change wasn't physical, it was instantaneous digital excommunication.
And all it took was pushing a few buttons.
That reliance on centralized digital financial and governance systems, that's what made the coup possible without a single shot being fired against most of the population. The state achieved total financial dependence overnight.
Forcing women into submission based on who their closest male next of kin was.
Yeah.
The intellectual control followed right after, because financial independence and literacy are the two pillars of autonomy. Offred worked transferring books to computer disks. She was one of the disseurs. But in Gilead, writing is forbidden.
The Bible itself, the supposed justification for the entire system, is locked up.
Like an incendiary device, because, as she says, Who knows what we'd make of it if we ever got our hands on it.
So the knowledge isn't just banned, it's considered dangerous, explosive. By denying literacy, the system prevents women from ever questioning the religious mandate that justifies their existence.
They can be told what the Bible says, but they can't verify it. And that creates an unassailable moral narrative for the regime.
And who are the only women allowed to read?
Crucially, the only women allowed to read and write are the aunts. This separation of knowledge, allowing one class of women to teach the doctrine and maintain the records, but forbidding the masses any access to the source material, it ensures the system can continually control the moral narratives and enforce obedience without fear of intellectual resistance.
So once independence is stripped, identity has to follow. The system replaced personal identity with these rigid social roles, enforced and signaled entirely through mandated uniforms. It's a classic tool of depersonalization.
It is. You take the individual and you just subsume them into the system. The colors are the immediate visible language of the regime. You can walk down the street and instantly identify the status, the function, the capacity of every single person you encounter.
Can you just detail that schema for us?
Of course. Handmaids wear red, the color of blood and fertility, defining their sole purpose. Wives wear blue, representing status, fidelity, maybe the coldness of that domestic sphere.
Okay.
Marthas, who are the domestic servants, wear a dull green. And the ruling class, the commanders and the angels, they wear black. Everything is dictated. It removes the cognitive load of choice and forces everyone to advertise their exact position within the social hierarchy.
The handmaid uniform, in particular, gets this intense, painful analysis from the narrator. The ankle-length skirts, the flat heels, they're a prescribed issue.
And not just for modesty. It's explicitly to preserve the spine and remove any hint of sexuality or allure. Even the memory of pre-Gilead days, of high heels and short skirts, has to be erased.
And the most iconic part, the white wings that frame the face, they serve this profound dual purpose.
They do. Offred notes they're designed to keep us from seeing, but also from being seen. They enforce internal isolation by blocking peripheral vision, and they enforce external anonymity by obscuring the wearer's individuality. The system literally uses the uniform to control sensory input.
This mechanism, it provides a deep insight into the psychological justification for the new order. The uniforms aren't just about control, they're sold as a form of protection.
That's Aunt Lydia's whole rationalization. This loss of freedom to the freedom to choose fashion or a career or partners is reframed as a different, allegedly better kind of safety. Freedom
from harassment, from obscenities, from the dangers of the old chaotic world.
Exactly. And this trade-off security in exchange for liberty is the ultimate lure of totalitarianism. By signaling this imposed protected status for a society terrified by chaos and biological collapse that holds a powerful appeal.
The system tells people, we took away your difficult choices, and in return, we gave you peace and safety.
Even if that peace is brutal.
Gilead, like any effective totalitarian system, it seems to thrive on these spectacular public rituals. They're designed to control both fear and mass psychological release.
They are massive tools for internalizing the regime's ideology and suppressing dissent. We constantly see the wall where bodies are frequently displayed. These are called salvaging public executions.
And who are they executing?
Often doctors, who are labeled angel makers for performing what were previously legal abortions, or political prisoners. And this serves as a horrifying example of retroactive crime. Offred notes that their crimes were legal at the time, but they're executed anyway, based on searches through old hospital records or informants.
The bodies on the wall are placed there, I think the quote is, so as many people as possible will have the chance to see them. They're explicitly time travelers, symbols of an unacceptable past.
And the system commands that the handmaids feel hatred and scorn towards these symbols, even though the narrator admits she feels neither. So the system tries to dictate internal emotional responses, but it often fails at that intimate level.
And beyond the wall, you have pravaganzas.
Right. Group ceremonies for men celebrating military victories, or for women, which might involve group weddings or the forced conversion of captured nuns. These rituals just reinforce the community narrative and the regime's divine authority.
But the most intense and psychologically manipulative ritual has to be the persecution. It's organized rage.
The historical notes provide some fascinating insight into the design of this ritual. It's designed chaos. It's revealed to be the idea of a commander Judd, and it was intended to act as a steam valve for the female elements in Gilead.
And the name itself is interesting.
It is. Commander Waterford, who significantly had a background in market research, he lifted the name from an old exercise program.
That detail is so telling. A modern behavioral science tool, market research, repurposed for mass political violence.
The persecution allows the handmaids, who are otherwise rigidly controlled and silent, official permission to release all their accumulated rage by ritually tearing a man apart with their bare hands. And the executed man, he might be a genuinely dangerous Mayday operative, or he might just be a political enemy. But the ritual serves its primary function regardless of his actual guilt. It channels all that female frustration away from the system itself and redirects it into sanctioned, violent scapegoating.
A release valve.
It's a release valve. As the historical notes observe, it echoes the fertility rites of early Earth goddess cults, which demonstrates that even the most advanced systems draw on the oldest, deepest human impulses.
Gilead didn't eliminate desire or transgression, it just regulated it to make it a currency of power and emotional complexity. And this is where we see the system's designers themselves becoming victims of their own architecture.
The commander, who is one of the system designers, he articulates his motive with this strange clinical detachment. He argues that pre-Gilead, men suffered from an inability to feel because sex was too easy. There was nothing to fight for.
So Gilead corrects this by creating total prohibition.
Making basic contact highly desirable, forbidden, and therefore thrilling. He views the former world as a historical anomaly.
It's a tragic observation on the state of male identity in the modern world. That the removal of challenge, the ease of access that comes with prosperity and technology, created a spiritual and emotional void. A void that needed to be filled by the artificial conflict of Gilead.
And what's fascinating is how the commander uses transgression not just for illicit sex, but for companionship and emotional stimulation. He is violating the system he helped design simply because he is bored and lonely.
So his transactional breaches of the law, playing forbidden Scrabble, sharing banned Vogue magazines, providing prohibited hand lotion.
Which is considered a vanity.
Right. All of that stems from his desire for attention and connection, which his wife, Serena Joy, won't provide because she wouldn't understand.
It's the banality of evil meeting the banality of middle-aged loneliness. He wants to feel like he's doing something naughty, like something from an old, elicited Dordian postcard. He gives Offred the hand lotion because he observes her secretly using butter on her face.
And he notes that her skin shouldn't become hard and wrinkled, like the shell of a nut. That detail is such a crucial crack in the system. He sees her as a person for a moment, not just a container.
And this impulse for connection is highly strategic, even if it's unconscious on his part. Offred quickly realizes she has leverage because of his weakness. She says, "What I have on him is the possibility of my own death. What I have on him is his guilt."
His need for novelty and connection provides the only leverage the handmaid possesses.
The fact that the commander is seeking companionship through forbidden games shows how even the designers were trapped by the system's emotional sterility. But this banality of control, it goes even deeper. It touches on this subtle psychological manipulation built into the regime's naming conventions.
Tell me about that.
Well, as a final note on the systemic design, we learn the ants' names were deliberately chosen from commercial products available to women in the immediate pre-Gilead period.
Like what?
Cosmetic lines, cake mixes, household products. Aunt Lydia, Aunt Sarah, they were chosen specifically to make them familiar and reassuring. Even the names of their oppressors were a calculated, nostalgic marketing tool from someone like Waterford, with his background in market research.
Leveraging pre-existing consumer trust to enforce terror. That's chilling.
It is.
Now let's transition from these core concepts to mapping the operational systems of Gilead. This society is a closed loop, and it's built on a household microsystem where every actor has a defined purpose and a set of incentives, regardless of how miserable they are within that structure.
Okay, so at the top of the household hierarchy, you have the commander. His role is to achieve progeny and maintain societal stability. His incentive is power, but the sources show us his incentives are also deeply psychological.
He's seeking connection, trying to relive the excitement of pre-Gilead prohibition.
Exactly. Through the Scrabble games and the illicit trip to Jezebel's, he's attempting to escape the system while he's simultaneously designing and upholding it.
And below him is the wife. Serena Joy is a former public speaker who advocated for the very system that has now trapped her. A really bitter irony. Her identity is completely defined by her inability to conceive.
And her incentive is social status, which she maintains through this rigid enforcement of domestic jurisdiction over the handmaid.
which creates a perverse incentive loop.
A completely perverse loop. The wife's status hinges on the handmaid's failure to replace her as the primary woman in the household, so it creates this state of continuous psychological rivalry. Wives enforce the ban on vanity, no hand lotion, disapproval of the red dress, to ensure the handmaid remains strictly a functional vessel, not a romantic rival,
They are, as Anne Lydia stated, defeated women.
who now enforce the defeat of others.
Next is the handmaid, Offred, who is literally the resource. Her sole purpose is reproduction, justified by that twisted biblical reading. Her primary incentives are basic survival.
Avoiding the death sentence of becoming an unwoman sent to the toxic colonies.
Right, and the internal preservation of hope and identity.
And this is why her acts of defiance are so important to the narrative, even if they're tiny. Tracing the secret message, "Nolate tivestards carborundorum," on the wall, using butter as a forbidden lotion, these are vital internal resistance mechanisms.
They keep the system from achieving total control over her soul.
Exactly.
And finally, we have the guardian's eyes. Guardians like Nick, the chauffeur, they have low social status. They're not issued a woman, which places them outside the immediate reproductive power structure. But Nick's incentive structure is deliberately complex.
It has to be. He may be Mayday, he may be an eye, the secret police, or he could be both.
The ambiguity of Nick is a systems design choice. The regime needs to sow mistrust everywhere.
And the historical notes confirm this. Mayday operatives had infiltrated the power structure at the highest levels, and chauffeurs often doubled as eyes. Nick is manipulating the situation, whether to protect himself, to aid Offred's escape, or to fulfill a mission for the eyes. He is a perfect example of how the system encourages double agents and radical uncertainty at its periphery.
The entire system is sustained by controlling the language and the moral justification. The foundation is this religious mandate, but it's a mandate that has been filtered and warped by the regime's needs.
And this mandate is selectively and often, frankly, ignorantly applied. They recite a slogan after dinner that is a distortion. It mixes Marxist and biblical phrases. From each, says the slogan, according to her ability, to each according to his needs.
That combination of socialist and biblical language shows how the commanders just cherry-picked useful phrases to legitimize their caste system.
And furthermore, the subjugation of women is justified through these fragments. I suffer not a woman to teach. She shall be saved by childbearing. The entire system is legitimized by twisting sacred texts, turning an ancient prohibition on teaching into a blanket denial of personhood.
And the second narrative, which underpins the whole function of the handmaid, is the logic of utility.
Yes. This is where we need to spend some time because it speaks to the economic mindset of the state. Aunt Lydia explicitly instructs handmaids that they are containers and that their outside appearance can become hard and wrinkled, like the shell of a nut.
The message is crystal clear. The only part of you that matters is the functional, productive, biological core.
Precisely. The system demands maximum productivity over personhood, and eliminating personhood is the most efficient way to maximize that utility. If the handmaid maintains vanity or curiosity or emotional attachment, she's wasting time and energy that should be dedicated to her sole mission.
So by reducing her status to a maintainable factory, the system removes the obstacle of human complexity and feeling.
Achieving maximal state efficiency.
A totalitarian system like Gilead sustains itself through these self-reinforcing loops, turning the population into enforcers or self-policers. These loops create stability even when the environment is unstable.
The most immediate one is the internal surveillance and conformity loop. The constant fear of the eyes, who significantly own the former university buildings, turning centers of thought into centers of espionage, and the presence of informants, just keeps everyone in line.
You can't trust the Marthas, you can't trust other handmaids, and you definitely can't trust the guardians.
The public display of bodies on the wall creates a tangible threat, reinforcing the need for rigid conformity every time Offred walks past. The threat is external, but the resulting conformity becomes internal.
And then there's that profound normalization loop. This is key to the system's long-term success.
It is. Aunt Lydia's mantra is the central psychological tool. Ordinary is what you're used to. This may not seem ordinary to you now, but after time it will. It will become ordinary.
That is deeply chilling because it suggests that human adaptability is the system's greatest asset.
Exactly. This psychological dulling of resistance forces a type of self-composition. Offred must continually compose herself like a speech, making her behavior and her internal thoughts presentable to the regime. Not because she believes in it, but because survival depends on it.
The system slowly erodes resistance not through violent confrontation, but through the mundane weight of the everyday.
And finally, we see the rebellion control loop. Acts of defiance like Moira escaping the Red Center by dismantling a toilet and using the sharp lever to subdue an ant.
They only confirm the system's plasticity and its capacity to learn.
The system adapts immediately. They add chains to toilet lids, they tighten security protocols. These acts of defiance create temporary hope for the subjugated, but ultimately they confirm the regime's capacity to identify flaws and strengthen its controls.
Even the commander's illicit trips to Jezebel's.
That's a great example. It's a regulated black market of sex, and it serves as a controlled release. It demonstrates that the system can accommodate and even monetize rule-breaking among its elite without threatening the overall structure. It's a way for the system to purge excess energy without causing a real explosion.
When we connect the systemic patterns in Gilead to modern institutions, we have to step back from literal prediction. We're looking for pattern recognition. How do these mechanisms of control manifest in our world right now?
The transition itself is the first terrifying lesson for us. The narrator remembers ignoring early, melodramatic news stories, corpses in ditches, bombings, thinking of them as dreams dreamt by others that were awful without being believable.
The slide happened not instantaneously, but in a gradually heating bathtub. We are so often conditioned to look for a cinematic, instantaneous collapse, but the systemic loss of freedom is often tedious, subtle, and incremental.
And this speaks directly to how centralized modern life can facilitate sudden systemic shifts. The immediate freezing of the CompuCards, all it took was pushing a few buttons, illustrates how our reliance on centralized digital financial and governance systems allows for swift, systemic changes in power distribution.
Without requiring mass physical resistance or violence.
Exactly.
Think about that carefully. You don't need tanks in the streets if you can neutralize bank accounts overnight. If all your economic identity is centralized and digital and the governance shifts, the ability for the new regime to enforce control is instantaneous and total. The vulnerability is built into the infrastructure we rely on for convenience.
We also see clear historical echoes of Gilead-style reproductive control. The source material explicitly mentions the precedent of policies enacted in Romania in the 1980s.
Which anticipated Gilead.
By banning all forms of birth control, imposing compulsory pregnancy tests on the female population, and linking promotion and wage increases to fertility.
And this wasn't fiction. It was a real-world system using biological control for perceived national utility. It just proves that when the state feels existentially threatened, the instrumentalization of reproduction immediately becomes a tool of power.
That mechanism is a global pattern, not some unique fictional invention.
And finally, let's reflect on the commander's deep systems-level critique of the pre-Gilead world. Men turning off on sex and marriage because of a lack of purpose and inability to feel. He believed that modern systems, through easy access and technological comfort, had inadvertently removed meaning or genuine challenge.
So, if a system removes genuine challenge and purpose, that void can be filled by regressive power structures, structures that create artificial yet dangerous mechanisms of control just to provide a sense of meaning and conflict to the oppressors.
It's a highly disturbing unintended consequence of prosperity and peace. That comfort breeds a strange kind of nihilism, which certain system designers are quick to exploit by creating artificial status and conflict, like the commanders did.
And as is common in our analysis here on crisis and perception, The Handmaid's Tale reiterates that the crisis wasn't caused by a single evil person or even a single group. It was a convergence of technological, biological, and cultural fears that were exploited by system designers.
The commanders were precisely these designers. Waterford, for example, had a background in market research. He was applying consumer behavior knowledge and psychological manipulation to the enforcement of social control.
They weren't just religious zealots. They were socio-political engineers using historical precedents in behavioral science, like implementing participation as a psychological steam valve. They understood incentives.
And we have to observe how power is hidden inside these seemingly neutral or bureaucratic processes. The CompuCheck system at the checkpoint records handmaid numbers, while bureaucratic systems enforce retroactive crimes.
Doctors are executed based on hospital records for performing previously legal abortions. That means the very archives of the previous system were turned into weapons.
Even a casual exchange of information like Moira's memory of the Quaker designation Q from an old mailing list becomes critical for survival on the underground female road. Every piece of data, no matter how benign its original context, can be repurposed by the state to enforce life or death decisions?
The system survives because it controls language and meaning. It seeks to erase history and identity. The system renames the university buildings after the eyes, seizing centers of intellectual freedom and turning them into centers of surveillance.
They take the French distress signal, a Maydes, which sounds like Mayday, and turn it into a resistance password. The struggle for control over words is the struggle for control over reality itself.
And the ultimate horrifying irony is the concept of a women's culture. Offred thinks of her feminist mother and she realizes, you wanted a women's culture. Well, now there is one. It isn't what you meant, but it exists.
That phrase just encapsulates how institutional power operates. The system has co-opted the language of female solidarity and purpose, the desire for safety, community, respect, and twisted it into institutional control and brutal patriarchy.
It proves that moral narratives can be embedded in institutions regardless of their original intent. The structure, once it's built, it simply runs on its own logic.
The Handmaid's Tale is, at its core, a story about perception and the incredible, sometimes terrifying adaptability of the human spirit. The narrator's struggle is less about mounting a revolution and more about the desperate internal fight to preserve her own reality and identity against a system explicitly designed to obliterate it.
Her acts of courage, writing the secret message, using butter as a forbidden lotion, simply remembering the names of the dead, they're tiny, invisible victories. The system can control her body, her actions, her movement, but it cannot entirely control her memory or her internal sense of self. And that is the failure point of even the most total system.
And that internal battle is what allows this story to exist at all. The narrator, Offred, addresses us, her listener, directly. She says, by telling you anything at all, I'm at least believing in you. I believe you're there. I believe you into being. Because I'm telling you this story, I will use your existence.
The act of storytelling is an act of creation and defiance against the void created by the regime.
And the ambiguity of Offred's fate stepping into the darkness within, or else the light when she enters Nick's van, that's intentional. We are left not with certainty, but with questions about her outcome, forcing us to focus on the mechanisms of the system rather than the fate of one individual.
Indeed. The historians in the historical notes suggest that, despite intense academic studies centuries later, the motivations and final outcomes of many actors remain opaque. They note, quote, we cannot always decipher them precisely in the clearer light of our own day.
The book challenges us to consider what details, what slow systemic shifts, and what uncomfortable truths we are ignoring now, and what critical gaps will exist in the historical record of our own time.
When we look at our own centralized systems, our own compute cards, what narratives are we allowing to normalize that will be difficult for future historians to decipher?
Our deep dive today was into The Handmaid's Tale by the incomparable Margaret Atwood. We encourage you to read the book yourself. Support the author if you found the ideas valuable, or check your local library for free access.
For a shorter visual overview of this topic, see the mini explainer linked in the description. If you enjoy this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.